You ever meet that guy who's the nicest dude until you realize he's got the social skills of a dial-up modem? Yeah, that's Bruce Prichard backstage, smiling like your buddy at the buffet, but plotting like he's running the CIA. The guy's got more grudges than Vince McMahon has steroid stories. Today, we're digging into the 5 poor bastards Bruce absolutely hated. And no, this isn't kayfabe, this is backstage, where if Bruce wanted you buried, you didn't get a funeral, just a "sorry, you're fired" email. Let's get roasting. So, let's get right into it. Man, Bruce Prichard hated Don Callis like white pants hate hot sauce. You ever seen a guy walk into a locker room and immediately get side-eyed like he just farted during a prayer? That's Don Callis. Dude showed up to the WWE like he had the cure for cancer, but all he had was a headset and a superiority complex. Bruce saw Don Callis on commentary and said, "Why is this dude talking like he's narrating the fall of the Roman Empire?" Don wasn't getting the talent over. He was getting himself over. Prichard hated that. Bruce wants control. This man micromanages everything. If Bruce ran a funeral, he'd tell the corpse how to die better. And here comes Callis with his slick suits, smug-ass grin, sounding like the villain from a Bond movie. Bruce couldn't take it. So what happened? Bruce hit him with that WWE kiss of death. Creative has nothing for you. Translation? Get the hell out before Vince even remembers your name. Callis didn't just get fired. He got erased like he said Chris Benoit's name on live TV. And the best part? Don didn't even blink. He just left and started making money elsewhere. Bruce? Still bitter. Probably wakes up at 3 a.m. like, "God damn it, Don's cutting another promo I didn't approve." And what did Don do? Left, rebranded, and got even smarter. Meanwhile, Bruce is still lurking backstage like a jealous ex with a podcast. If Don Callis was a chessboard, Bruce was still playing Hungry Hungry Hippos. Bruce Prichard didn't hate Jonathan Coachman because he was annoying. He hated him because Coach managed to be annoying and completely irrelevant at the same time. That's talent. That's like being too loud and invisible. Coachman thought he was the next Mean Gene. Bruce thought he was the next guy who parks Mean Gene's car. This man came into WWE with the energy of a church youth pastor and the charisma of a broken fax machine. Coach didn't just suck the air out of a room. He recycled it, filtered it through a Word document, and tried to pitch it as a segment. He wore a suit like a man auditioning for a job no one wanted filled. Bruce called him Coach, but not because he respected him. It's just that assistant to the regional buzzkill didn't fit on the nameplate. Every time Coach grabbed a mic, you could hear the Nielsen ratings commit suicide. Backstage, he was a corporate yes man, and Bruce hated yes men unless they said yes to firing other yes men. Coach was the kind of guy who'd report you for not laughing at a Vince joke. And Bruce didn't just hate that. He hated that Coach was proud of it. Eventually, Bruce did what you do when your Alexa won't shut up. He unplugged the guy, cold-shouldered him out the door, and let ESPN find out what it's like to be slowly smothered by a PowerPoint in a tie. Jonathan Coachman is living proof that not every mic should be hot. Bruce Prichard didn't hate Stephanie McMahon because she was a woman in power. He hated her because she was a power in a woman costume, wearing a blazer like it came with a guillotine. If Vince was a tyrant, Stephanie was the intern who took notes and said, "You could be meaner." Bruce helped build WWE's creative backbone. Stephanie helped replace that spine with a PowerPoint. She showed up to meetings like a Hallmark card dipped in battery acid. Let's innovate. Sure, by recycling old angles and firing anyone who remembered them the first time. By 2008, Bruce wasn't just on thin ice. Stephanie installed a heated floor under it. The moment she rose to EVP of Creative, Bruce found himself getting ghosted harder than a bad Tinder date with head trauma. Suddenly, meetings moved without him. Emails stopped going through, and the catering staff wouldn't even give him the good brownies. He said in shoot interviews that things changed when she came into power. Translation: she cut him off like a bad habit and left him on red like a mid-card promo. Stephanie ran Creative like a hostile takeover dressed up as a rebrand. She wanted new blood, and not just in the product. Bruce's old-school ways got filed under HR concern. By the time he got the boot, she didn't even fake concern. That's the scariest part. You expect a knife in the back. You don't expect it to be sterilized and scheduled via Outlook. Bruce might have loved Vince like a twisted father figure. But Stephanie was the WWE Hunger Games tribute who finally pressed the button that made him disappear. And she did it with a smile. Because real killers don't scream and they send calendar invites. Bruce Prichard didn't hate Vince Russo because of some dumb wrestling angle. He hated him because working with Russo was like babysitting a caffeinated raccoon who thought he was the smartest guy in the room, even when the room was empty. Russo wasn't a collaborator. He was a hijacker with a Brooklyn accent. Bruce came from old-school storytelling, structure, patience. Russo came in like, bro, let's change the entire show during the show. Russo didn't just pitch chaos, and he lived it. He walked around at production meetings like he had all the answers, when half the time he couldn't even remember the damn question. What really burned Bruce? Russo had zero respect for the business unless it served him. He didn't learn from veterans, didn't care about locker room structure, and sure as hell didn't care if the talent looked like idiots, so long as he looked like a genius in front of Vince McMahon. And Prichard saw through that act like it was printed on tissue paper. Russo played politics with all the subtlety of a slap to the nuts. He'd whisper one thing in Vince's ear, then duck out of meetings before anything blew up. Bruce was always left holding the bag, cleaning up messes, smoothing egos, and explaining to legends why some dude from Long Island who used to write magazine blurbs was now calling the shots. Prichard hated Russo the way every veteran hates the guy who gets the gig, not because he earned it, but because he knew who to kiss and when. And worst of all, Russo thought he was a genius. Bruce thought he was a liability in jorts. Bruce Prichard didn't just dislike Jim Cornette. He survived him. Working with Cornette was like trying to do HR with Yosemite Sam on Adderall. Every meeting felt like a hostage video where Corny was threatening to murder the English language, and half the locker room with a tennis racket. And Bruce? Bruce was the guy tasked with getting him to calm down. Like, hey, Corny, maybe don't threaten to castrate Vince Russo with barbed wire on air. Too late. He'd already mailed the scissors. The hate was real, personal, and combustible. Cornette thought Bruce was a corporate stooge in a fat suit. A yes man who'd sell out wrestling tradition just to keep Vince McMahon's coffee hot. Bruce thought Corny was a walking migraine who acted like Jim Crockett, Promotions, was the Bible, and he was God's pissed-off narrator. When Cornette stormed out of WWE in 2005, Bruce didn't try to stop him. He probably held the door, handed him a bottle of Yoo-Hoo, and whispered, "Godspeed, you lunatic." Corny claimed he quit over the OVW setup being sabotaged. Bruce claimed Cornette was unprofessional and impossible to manage, which is like calling a grenade a bit loud. And they kept the hate alive, like two old dogs barking across a fence. Cornette on his podcast calling Bruce a lying sack of shit with gravy in his veins, and Bruce pretending he doesn't even listen. Right. Bruce probably has an aneurysm every time Corny uploads a thumbnail. This wasn't just beef. This was deep-fried, gravy-smothered, barbed wire-wrapped hate between two guys who should have been allies, but instead became the most toxic buddy cop team that never aired. So there you have it. Bruce Prichard's greatest hits of backstage hell, a symphony of side eyes, silent treatment, and shoot interviews with more venom than a pit of cobras. The man's spent decades surviving a business where people fake punches but throw real grudges. And somehow he's still in the mix, grinning like a guy who just watched your career die in catering. Bruce never needed to bury anyone. He just waited until they did it themselves, then told the story with a bad impression and a bucket of gravy. He's not just a wrestling historian. He's the snarky voice in your head when everything goes to shit. And hey, if he hates you, that's probably the best push you're ever gonna get. Smash that like button harder than a worked punch in '98. And subscribe before Bruce rewrites your life story with a fart joke and a catchphrase. Thanks for watching. Jim Cornette hates bullshit, which is unfortunate, because pro wrestling has more bullshit per square inch than a barn in August. Cornette is like if your cranky uncle got hit in the head with a Mid-South turnbuckle and woke up furious at everyone who ever wore pleather. The man lives on spite. It's his cardio. Jim Cornette is what happens when pure wrestling genius mates with pure, unfiltered rage. He's like if Yelp reviews could get physically violent. The man has so much hate inside him, I'm amazed he hasn't exploded like a crockpot left on overnight. Cornette doesn't just hate bad wrestling. He hates the people who made it possible. Like their existence is a personal insult to his childhood. This isn't I disagree hate. This is I hope your kids flunk out of life just for inheriting your wrestling opinions, and every time you sneeze, it triggers a PTSD flashback of kind of hate. Jim Cornette hated Kevin Steen like he owed him money, ate his dog, and called Memphis wrestling mid in the same sentence. Steen, now known as Kevin Owens in WWE, represented everything Cornette loathes: fat guys doing moonsaults, indie darlings with beards instead of charisma, and worst of all, getting over without Cornette's approval. Cornette thought Steen looked like a guy who installs cable in your crawl space and then asks for a sandwich. He once called him an unathletic slob who thinks popping the crowd is the same thing as drawing money. The Ring of Honor fallout was volcanic. Cornette wanted traditional wrestling storytelling. Steen wanted to scream, bleed, and hit package piledrivers like a psychotic Canadian toddler with sugar rage. Fans loved it. Cornette fucking hated it. At one point, Cornette legit told ROH brass, "It's him or me." Guess who packed his tennis racket and rage quit? Cornette later described Steen as someone who was a bad influence on the locker room and a guy who thinks being disgusting and dangerous is a gimmick. He didn't just dislike the work, he despised the guy. Said he had no work ethic, no respect, and no clue how to draw a dime. But hey, Steen made it to WWE, and Jim Cornette still can't watch Raw without rage pissing himself into a coma, so who really won? Jim Cornette didn't just hate Joey Ryan, he wanted him erased from the business with fire. If Kevin Steen pissed him off, Joey Ryan made Cornette want to file a restraining order against California. The man wrestled with his dick, and Cornette reacted like someone had pissed on the Declaration of Wrestling. Cornette called Joey Ryan a fucking embarrassment to the industry. And that was before the sexual assault allegations made him look like Harvey Weinstein with baby oil. Long before Speaking Out movement exposed him like the world's greasiest men's rights activist, Cornette was screaming, "This guy's ruining wrestling by turning it into clown porn with ropes." Ryan's infamous penis flip spot, where opponents sold his dick like it was Hulk Hogan's comeback, made Cornette snap so hard he nearly started a civil war on Twitter. He went nuclear. "This ain't wrestling. This is what happens when virgins book feds for other virgins. If this guy ever worked Memphis in the 80s, Lawler would have had him murdered in a parking lot by the second intermission." After Ryan's career imploded under a mountain of assault allegations and lawsuits, Cornette basically held a fucking celebration. Said it was proof the wrestling gods exist and they hate stupid gimmicks and perverts. He even joked that Joey should try stand-up, because he's already used to dying on stage with his dick out. Jim Cornette hates Kevin Dunn so much, I'm pretty sure he has a voodoo doll with little buck teeth and a lanyard. For Cornette, Dunn isn't just some annoying TV exec. He's the venereal disease of wrestling production, a man who turned sports-based storytelling into a Michael Bay migraine. Dunn was Vince McMahon's right-hand man in production, the guy behind the crash zooms, seizure-inducing camera cuts, and everybody talked like robots while standing in blue light promos. Cornette hated him with the intensity of 1,000 burning Crockett tapes. Called him a useless little beaver-toothed prick who doesn't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch, but gets to decide how wrestling looks on TV. Let's be real, Cornette saw Dunn as the piece of shit who had no respect for the business, but got power anyway. Like if your dentist's son took over your wrestling company and started telling Ric Flair to work the TikTok crowd. Worse, Cornette claimed Dunn actively buried talent he didn't like. Supposedly, he tried to block Mick Foley because of his look and told Becky Lynch she didn't look like a star. If Kevin Dunn doesn't think you're hot enough, you're screwed. Which is rich coming from a guy who looks like if a chipmunk snorted meth and learned Final Cut Pro. Cornette's knockout line? Kevin Dunn got his job because his daddy worked for Vince. He's a legacy hire with the instincts of a drunk squirrel and the vision of a guy filming a car crash through a kaleidoscope. Jim Cornette sees Kenny Omega as the human equivalent of a melted action figure. All flash, no soul, and he smells vaguely of Axe body spray and unearned smugness. Cornette has called him everything from Kenny Olivier, mocking his artsy, over-choreographed style, to the worst main event talent in wrestling history. He once screamed, "Kenny Omega is what happens when wrestling fans fuck their video game consoles." Cornette's biggest gripe? Omega turned wrestling into performance art. Like ballet, if ballet had trigger fingers and nobody sold a goddamn thing. His famous matches with Okada in New Japan? Cornette said they were 60 minutes of mutual masturbation with a rope break. And then there's the infamous Invisible Man spot, Kenny wrestling a child, or the time he sold for an invisible opponent. Cornette almost had a fucking stroke on air. He wrestled a goddamn blow-up doll. That's not wrestling. That's a cry for help you upload to Pornhub. Cornette also roasted Omega's role in AEW's launch. He said putting Kenny in charge of talent was like handing a loaded gun to a toddler with the hiccups. The guy booked himself as a janitor in a promo and wants to main event with comedy school dropouts. What the fuck happened to wrestling? Kenny's fans will argue, he tells stories. Cornette's comeback? So does Dr. Seuss. Doesn't mean I want him in the fucking main event of Starrcade. And AEW? Cornette believes Omega helped turn it from a revolution into a cartoon. He walks out in feathers, makes gun hands, acts like he's in Dragon Ball Z, and then wrestles a guy in a dinosaur mask. That's not a company. That's a psych ward with entrance music. Jim Cornette doesn't hate Vince Russo. He wants him airlifted to Syria wearing a John Cena shirt and a sign that says, "I hate Allah." If you ask Cornette who ruined wrestling, he won't say the networks or corporate America. He'll scream, "Vince fucking Russo," then spit, bleed, and probably assault a Wendy's cashier just to get it out of his system. Russo was the creative genius behind WWF's Attitude Era. But according to Cornette, he wasn't a booker. He was a crash test dummy with a typewriter and brain damage. This is the guy who booked Mae Young giving birth to a hand, Judy Bagwell on a forklift, and a shoot promo every 9 minutes because he thought realism meant nobody sells anything and everyone says bro like it's Tourette's. Cornette once said Russo's writing was so bad it made the room look like Citizen Kane in trunks, and he meant it. Cornette's knocked him as an illiterate New York goofball who thought wrestling fans wanted Jerry Springer with headlocks. He said Russo had the creative instincts of a syphilitic squirrel on a cocaine bender with a subscription to Hustler and a hatred for logic. "This feud is so personal," Cornette said. "If Vince Russo was on fire, I wouldn't piss on him to put it out. I'd roast marshmallows and write better booking while he screamed." Here's some of Jim Cornette's most infamous quotes on Vince Russo. "The saddest moment in a child's life is not when he learns that Santa Claus isn't real. It's when he learns that Vince Russo is. I started this low-carb, low-sugar diet because I refuse to be outlived by Vince Russo. The grass is greener on the other side. Unless Vince Russo was there, then the grass is probably dead." Or when he said, "Vince Russo destroyed the periodic table as he only recognizes the element of surprise. He is the only booker I've seen who doesn't get people over, he gets them under." Picking out Vince Russo's faults could be a full-time job for somebody. Asshole, dipshit, cocksucker, motherfucker, prick, crook, conman, blithering idiot, Christian. And finally, if Russo and Ferrara are in a room, a city, perhaps even a county, I'm working on state, I wouldn't be in it. I was once talked out of taking a baseball bat to Russo by Jim Ross, but I'm not sure I thank him for it. I want Vince Russo to die. If I could figure out a way to murder him without going to prison, I would consider it the greatest accomplishment of my life. These quotes encapsulate the intense animosity Jim Cornette holds towards Vince Russo, reflecting a deep-seated feud that has become legendary in the wrestling community. The bottom line? Cornette hates Vince Russo more than hemorrhoids, Vince McMahon, and God combined. He doesn't want him fired. He wants him unborn. What did we just survive? 5 stages of pure, molten, caffeinated wrath. This wasn't a list. It was a damn hit parade of everything that makes one man's forehead vein twitch like it's trying to escape his skull. This guy doesn't hate people. He marinates in it. He slow cooks that fury in a crock pot for 30 years and serves it up raw on live radio. Every new trend is a personal insult. Every bad idea is a war crime. And every time someone tries to sports entertain, he grabs the mic like it owes him child support. He's not mad because he's old. He's mad because everyone else is stupid. Like and subscribe, or go book a scaffold match between your common sense and a lawnmower. See who bleeds first. Thanks for fucking watching. Bobby the Brain Heenan was the greatest wrestling manager who ever lived. A ringside Mozart who composed symphonies of sarcasm while wearing a tux. But behind the bravado and barbs was a guy who didn't just talk smack for the cameras. He really hated some of these bastards. We're not talking worked rivalries or kayfabe beef. We're talking legit backstage shoot heat, broken trust, bruised egos, and busted relationships. These are the 5 men Heenan would have gladly tossed into the path of a moving ring truck if given half the chance. Strap in. It's going to get ugly. So, without wasting any time, let's get right into it. You know a guy's career is circling the drain when Bobby Heenan refuses to save it. That was Terry Taylor's problem. And no, not just because he was shoved into the Red Rooster gimmick like a guy getting pantsed in front of a date. Heenan managed the gimmick, sure, but he didn't manage Taylor. Why? Because he hated him. Straight up. In Heenan's own words, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. He didn't just mean the gimmick, he meant the man. Taylor strutted into the WWF locker room with NWA confidence and Crockett arrogance, and Heenan smelled it on him like a bad cologne. He thought he was hot stuff, said Bruce Prichard on something to wrestle 2017. But Bobby? He saw right through it. Taylor thought he was destined for main event gold. Heenan thought he was destined for wrestling challenge dark matches. He'd mock him off mic, calling him Feather Flare and the rooster that laid an egg. And when Vince stuck Heenan with the Red Rooster angle, the brain knew he was managing a gimmick designed to fail. Heenan could turn jobbers into heat magnets, but Taylor wasn't a heat magnet. He was a goddamn charisma black hole. Behind the curtain, things got tense. Taylor didn't take advice. Heenan hated that. Taylor blamed Bobby for the gimmick tanking. Heenan laughed and told everyone Taylor couldn't get over if he was on fire at WrestleMania. When Taylor jumped ship to WCW, Bobby didn't shed a tear. In fact, he once said, "The rooster flew the coop? Good. Now I don't have to step in his crap anymore." That wasn't a joke. That was Heenan's real shoot-level farewell tweet before Twitter existed. If you asked Bobby Heenan what Bruiser Brody brought to the wrestling business, he might have said, a bad attitude, unpaid house show fines, and the worst hair this side of a scarecrow fire. Heenan hated Brody, not in a playful, work-the-marks way. We're talking deep-rooted, real-life animosity. The brain saw Brody as a reckless, unprofessional wildcard who killed more territory momentum than a broken ring truck. And Bobby didn't just dislike chaos. He resented uncontrolled chaos that made him look bad. The heat started in the AWA, where Heenan was managing polished, reliable talent like Nick Bockwinkel, and Brody rolled in like a walking middle finger to structure. He'd no show bookings, brawl for real, and go off script like he was allergic to psychology. Bobby called him a lunatic who thought the rules were written in pencil. He didn't trust him in the ring or out of it. Heenan told Wrestling Eye magazine in a rare shoot-style moment, "You couldn't count on Brody. You didn't book him. You braced for him." Their paths crossed in St. Louis and again in Texas, where Heenan saw Brody get into it with promoters, stiff opponents, and just about anyone who told him to work a finish. Heenan prided himself on keeping his matches tight, his angles clean, and his workers safe. Brody treated every show like a goddamn riot in a metal bar. The final straw? Brody sandbagged a Heenan guy in a tag match and blew the finish so bad it made Heenan look like he'd booked it on acid. Backstage, Heenan snapped, calling him an embarrassment to the business and a disgrace to the boots. And when Brody was blackballed from major American promotions for being a liability, Heenan didn't mince words. Good. Let him work in Japan. Maybe they don't care if you kill the match. Brody was a legend, sure, but to Bobby Heenan he was a disease, and the cure was never booking him again. There are assholes in wrestling, and then there's Dynamite Kid, a guy so toxic Bobby Heenan once described him as the reason we couldn't have nice things. Now look, Bobby didn't throw shade lightly, but Dynamite? He earned every ounce of venom. Heenan wasn't some wide-eyed babyface shocked by locker room politics, and he thrived in that jungle. But even he hated Dynamite's guts. Not because of his in-ring style, though Stiff doesn't begin to cover it, but because of how Dynamite poisoned every room he walked into. Let's be clear, Heenan loved managing talent. He liked working with professionals. Dynamite was the opposite, a walking lawsuit with roid rage and a bad attitude. He terrorized rookies, bullied ring crew, pulled cruel ribs that weren't funny, and turned the backstage into a toxic war zone. Heenan told longtime friend Mike Tinney, Dynamite wasn't tough, he was miserable, and he made it his job to make you miserable too. Heenan despised the way Dynamite treated staff like punching bags, especially when the cameras weren't rolling. He hated his holier-than-thou attitude toward American wrestling psychology, constantly bitching about tag match pacing and storytelling, like every match needed a 45-minute Tokyo Dome epiphany. And you better believe Heenan hated how Dynamite treated his own family. He once said, "If your kids are scared of you and your tag partner hates your guts, maybe you're not a wrestling genius. Maybe you're just a piece of shit." By the time Dynamite's back gave out and he limped out of WWF, Bobby didn't exactly send flowers. In fact, when asked about Dynamite years later, Heenan simply shrugged and said, "We lost a talented wrestler and gained peace and quiet. Dynamite was dangerous. Bobby didn't do dangerous. He did calculated heat. Dynamite was the guy who kicked in the locker room door just to piss on the rug. And Heenan never forgot it." If Ole Anderson was any more bitter, he'd come with a lemon wedge. And Bobby Heenan? He didn't just dislike Ole. He treated him like a walking hemorrhoid in a booking committee blazer. This wasn't backstage tension. This was shoot-loathing. Ole and Bobby clashed like two grizzly bears with creative control. Bobby was a performer, charisma, timing, and entertainment. Ole was a block of wood that hated anything with color. The man wrestled like he was mad that fun existed. Heenan said flat out in interviews, Ole Anderson was the only guy who could make Ric Flair boring. That's a talent. A dark, miserable talent. The heat between them went back to the AWA and Georgia Championship Wrestling. Ole thought Bobby's style was too comedic. Didn't like his bumps, didn't like his heat, and didn't like the crowd loving Heenan more than half the babyfaces. So Ole did what Ole always did. Bury the stuff that worked. He'd veto Heenan's segments, cut finishes short, and tank any momentum Bobby brought with him. Heenan retaliated the only way he knew how. Microphone flamethrower. If Ole had a personality, he'd rent it out during the off-season. Ole's booking style was just as joyless as his promos. He pushed stiff, slow matches with zero pop, and he made locker rooms more miserable than a 3-hour Iron Man match between two sleep paralysis demons. But the real knife twist? Ole helped push Heenan out of WCW. While Bobby was trying to salvage commentary under Bischoff's circus tent, Ole was backstage making sure the Brain had fewer and fewer allies. That betrayal stuck. Bobby summed up Ole in his book like only he could. I've seen funeral homes with more life. Ole Anderson was born old, booked badly, and aged into irrelevance. They say respect is earned. Ole earned Bobby's eternal disgust. If Bobby Heenan could have booked one more match in heaven, it would have been Warrior vs. a Wall, just so the Wall could no-sell him too. Let's get this straight. Bobby Heenan fucking hated the Ultimate Warrior. Not in a fun, what a character kind of way. I mean real life, hold my wig, call a lawyer level venom. Warrior wasn't just a bad wrestler to Bobby. Warrior was a plague. A jacked up, rope-shaking, promo-babbling thunderstorm of delusion who stomped through the locker room like he was Jesus in tassels. Bobby tried to work with him once. Once. That's all it took. During their 1989 run, Warrior legit dropped Bobby on his neck, injuring his vertebra and causing years of pain. Bobby told Warrior to ease up. Warrior screamed something about cosmic energy and shoved a lighting rig. It wasn't just dangerous. It was idiotic. Warrior didn't listen to vets. He didn't respect timing. He didn't care about storytelling. He just wanted to run to the ring like a meth tornado and blow through everyone in 90 seconds. Heenan later said in his book, he had the body of a god, the brain of a stapler, and the personality of a dead car battery. He hated how Warrior held up Vince for money, hated how he big-timed everyone backstage, and hated how the guy thought quoting Nietzsche in promos made him deep. Newsflash, you're not a philosopher if your finisher's called the gorilla press. Bobby on commentary used to roast him live. The man can't spell title, let alone win one fairly. Warrior was everything Bobby hated. Selfish, unsafe, humorless, and high on his own cosmic nonsense. And Bobby? He was the last guy who'd ever buy into that Warrior-verse bullshit. Bobby Heenan wasn't just the greatest manager in pro wrestling history. He was also the pettiest legend alive, and we love him for it. These five weren't kayfabe rivals. They were real, backstage nightmares. Ole, Warrior, Brody, Dynamite, and Taylor didn't just cross paths with the Brain. They lit the damn bridge on fire and pissed on it. And Bobby? He kept the matches dry, just in case he wanted to burn them again. Because when the Brain hated you, you earned it. Like this ride through wrestling's grudge file. Hit that like, crack that subscribe, and ring the damn bell harder than Warrior's dumbass head hit Heenan's neck. Bobby would have wanted it that way. Thanks for watching. So, before we begin, let me make one thing absolutely clear right off the bat. These are Jesse Ventura's words, not mine. If you're a die-hard Hulkamaniac, or someone who once found the Iron Sheik inspirational, likely while intoxicated, don't come crying to me. This is Jesse's personal hall of hatred, born from years in the trenches, shirtless, tanned, and yelling about conspiracy theories before it was cool. Ventura's career was more colorful than Sheik's urine tests, and more unpredictable than Dr. D in a news interview. A Navy SEAL, a wrestling star, a commentator, a movie villain, a governor, and a guy who probably owns a panic room filled with Area 51 documents and protein powder. But above all, Jesse was a man who didn't play politics unless he was literally running for office. He spoke his truth, consequences be damned, and the men you're about to hear about, they ended up in the blast radius. So sit back, click like and subscribe if you enjoy politically incorrect stories told through a pair of tinted wraparound sunglasses, and prepare for 5 wrestlers that Jesse, the Body Ventura, absolutely could not stand. And now, coming in hot at number 5, it's the human lawsuit generator himself. In Jesse's mind, Dr. D. David Schultz was the kind of man who could start a fist fight with a salad. This was a guy who thought subtlety was a French insult. The man's entire gimmick was abusive redneck who gets sued by journalists. And that wasn't an act. Ventura and Schultz shared time in the AWA and early WWF, but the relationship was colder than a steroid vial in a Minnesota winter. Jesse never minced words about Dr. D. He saw him as an unhinged powder keg who thought the word diplomacy meant hitting someone in the mouth before they spoke. Schultz wasn't just rough around the edges, he was sandpaper soaked in whiskey and rage. Jesse, who always prided himself on cutting verbal promos sharp enough to slice through Vince McMahon's spray tan, despised Schultz's caveman antics. But what really sealed the deal was that infamous moment on 2020 when Schultz slapped John Stossel so hard the guy started picking up AM radio. Jesse wasn't mad because Schultz exposed the business. Jesse hated him because he made wrestlers look like feral lunatics. "You're supposed to be a professional, not a bar bouncer with a brain injury," Jesse once said. "And you don't sue the company after. That's some Hulk Hogan-level cowardice right there." Schultz, meanwhile, once mocked Jesse for being too Hollywood and too into himself, which is rich, coming from a man who wore a cowboy hat and delivered promos like he was yelling at his third ex-wife through a restraining order. Jesse may have been loud, theatrical, and borderline paranoid, but he was never dumb. Schultz? Schultz had all the grace of a fart in church and none of the subtlety. Final verdict? Dr. D wasn't a rebel. He was a liability in cowboy boots. The Iron Sheik to Jesse was a walking contradiction. A man who fled Iran's regime only to become a stereotype that could have been cooked up in a Ronald Reagan fever dream. He was a parody of a parody, Jesse grunted. He made Glow look like serious journalism. Their heat came not just from stylistic differences, but because Sheik represented everything Ventura hated about the WWF's cartoonish era. Where Jesse wanted wrestling to be edgy, political, and real, Sheik was stumbling around shouting about breaking backs and making people humble, like a drunk Borat who'd been hit in the head with a kettlebell. Jesse especially hated the Sheik's chaotic behavior backstage. You couldn't trust him. One minute he's your friend, the next he's snorting coke off a road agent's clipboard and challenging Hacksaw Duggan to a blood feud in a parking lot. This, of course, culminated in the scandal. Sheik and Duggan busted together in '87. Duggan, the flag-waving good guy. Sheik, the evil foreign menace. The kayfabe equivalent of Superman getting caught smoking meth with Lex Luthor in a van. Ventura saw it as a betrayal, not of character, but of intelligence. "I was trying to unionize wrestling," Jesse said, while this maniac was trying to unionize coke dealers in Newark. It didn't help that Sheik would rant about Ventura in shoot interviews years later, calling him a jabroni politician, which is possibly the most coherent thing he ever said. Jesse didn't retaliate. He didn't need to. The Sheik's life was already its own punishment. At the end of the day, Jesse viewed the Iron Sheik as a circus act, dangerous, unstable, and too high to know he was walking in circles. You know your heat's real when it leaps out of the squared circle and lands you in a federal courtroom. And that's exactly what happened when Jesse, the body Ventura, got name-dropped in Chris Kyle's best-selling bullet fantasy American Sniper. Except Ventura didn't read it as a flattering cameo. He read it as a $1.8 million defamation lawsuit waiting to happen. And in 2014, that's exactly what it became. Here's the supposed story from Kyle's book. In a California bar in 2006, Kyle claims Jesse was bad-mouthing Navy SEALs in the Iraq War. So Kyle, in his own words, punched him out. Classic barroom hero stuff, like if G.I. Joe had a ghostwriter on meth. The problem? Jesse Ventura says it never happened. No punch, no slur, no bar fight. Just fiction sold as fact to the Walmart crowd. Ventura, himself a legit Navy UDT, underwater demolition team veteran, the precursor to SEALs, was furious. To Jesse, this wasn't just an insult to his name, but an insult to the uniform. He dragged Kyle to court, and after Kyle conveniently died in 2013, kept going after his estate. The jury ruled in Ventura's favor $1.8 million in damages, which got overturned on appeal before a later settlement shut it down quietly. But the hate? Oh, the hate never got settled. Jesse Ventura saw Kyle as the ultimate phony tough guy, someone who monetized war like it was WrestleMania 19. To Ventura, American Sniper was less autobiography and more WWE entrance promo for the Halliburton generation. He openly called Kyle a liar, questioned his confirmed kills, and nuked his mythos with SEAL team precision. This feud wasn't about ego, it was about principle. Ventura believed Chris Kyle represented everything broken about America's post-9/11 military complex. Truth replaced with jingoism, accountability swapped for flag-waving fantasy, and lies sold by the hardcover. Vince McMahon may have invented sports entertainment, but Jesse Ventura invented telling him to fuck off and meaning it. Their heat goes all the way back to the golden age of WWF, when Ventura was dropping sound bites like pipe bombs at the commentary desk. The fans loved him, the boys respected him. And Vince? Vince hated that Jesse couldn't be owned. The man wore pink boas and military credentials. He was a walking lawsuit with abs, and he did the unthinkable. He unionized, or at least tried to. In the late 80s, Jesse pitched the idea of a wrestler's union. Healthcare, retirement, basic human rights. Vince treated that like Jesse had suggested sacrificing Linda to the gods of Turner Broadcasting. Ventura alleged that Hulk Hogan ratted him out to Vince, who then threatened to blackball anyone who joined. From that day on, Jesse didn't just want Vince out of the wrestling business, he wanted him in front of Congress wearing handcuffs and a fanny pack. Jesse would later say, "Vince McMahon is the type of guy who'd charge you for your own autopsy if he could figure out how to copyright your corpse." When Ventura became governor of Minnesota in 1999, Vince invited him back for SummerSlam. A PR stunt Jesse played along with like he was babysitting a sugar-crazed chimp in a tuxedo. But the real war came in court. Jesse sued the WWF for unpaid royalties from his commentary being used on Coliseum videos. Vince claimed he wasn't owed a dime. The jury disagreed. Jesse walked away with over $800,000, proving you could outmuscle McMahon in a court of law, something even Bret Hart didn't manage. Jesse never respected the suits, the sycophants, or the yes sir bootlickers. And Vince? He was all three, wrapped in a gorilla body and greased with spray tan. Their feud wasn't just personal, it was philosophical warfare. Jesse believed in rights, Vince believed in revenue. This wasn't heel versus face, this was David versus Goliath, with David holding a union card. If Vince McMahon was the puppet master, then Hulk Hogan was the dancing meat puppet, posing, politicking, and poisoning every locker room like a bleach blonde patient zero. And Jesse Ventura? He saw through him from the start. Their hatred was deep and mutual, but Ventura's reasons were principled. Hogan's were about power, and the one time Ventura tried to wield it for the boys, Hogan slammed it down like a steel chair to democracy's spine. Jesse wanted to unionize pro wrestling, a revolutionary act that would have changed the entire industry. Pension, health insurance, a 401k that didn't involve selling bootleg merch in a high school gym. The boys were ready. But Hogan? That overcooked Slim Jim in bandanas? He ran to Vince like a tattletale with pecs and ratted Jesse out. Ventura only found out during his lawsuit against the WWF when they deposed McMahon, and he finally admitted it was Hogan. Hogan stooged you out. And that was the last straw. Jesse didn't just loathe Hogan the politician, he loathed Hogan the phony. Ventura was a Navy veteran who served for real. Hogan was a beach bum with a bicep. Ventura said it best. Hogan was always playing a hero, never being one. Jesse saw a man who sold out the boys, sold out the fans, and still couldn't figure out how to pronounce charisma without flexing. To Ventura, Hogan was a cautionary tale. What happens when ego outgrows ethics and the spotlight becomes more important than the truth? Jesse spent his life fighting for causes. Hogan spent his fighting for pay-per-view points. This wasn't just heat. This was scorched earth. If Jesse Ventura had his way, Hogan wouldn't just be booed out of the Hall of Fame. He'd be mandatory viewing in every What Not to Do class at WWE Performance Center. And there you have it. 5 men who Jesse, the Body Ventura, wouldn't piss on if they were on fire outside a VA hospital. This wasn't just heat. This was the atomic heat you get when you mix a union-backing Navy SEAL with the carny underworld of professional wrestling and the militarized snake oil peddlers of post-9/11 America. Dr. D tried to slap his way to relevance. The Iron Sheik could barely cut a promo without cutting a lung. Chris Kyle couldn't hit Jesse in a bar fight that never happened. Vince McMahon, all the humanity of a vending machine that steals your dollar. And Hulk Hogan, a walking merchandise stand in desperate need of a soul. But remember, these were Jesse's beefs, not mine. I'm just the messenger riding shotgun on Ventura's mental tank as it barrels through hypocrisy like it owed him back pay. The man didn't just hate, he litigated. He didn't just feud, he federally filed. When Jesse said he wasn't afraid to stand alone, he meant it. Probably in camo pants, probably while writing his own conspiracy theory about Area 51 having a Planet Fitness. So if you laughed, if you learned, if you felt the urge to tell someone in corporate wrestling to go pound sand, do the honorable thing. Like, subscribe, click the bell, send this to someone who still thinks Hogan was a hero. And remember, thanks for watching. Gorilla Monsoon was the voice of WWF, the gatekeeper of credibility, and the last guy you wanted silently judging your botched suplex from the commentary booth. He was a titan of taste, and when Gorilla hated you, brother, the whole locker room felt it. This ain't about kayfabe, it's about shoot heat, real animosity. So let's raise the curtain and drag out the 5 wrestlers Monsoon couldn't stand. It's roast time, and Gorilla's ghost is front row, stone-faced and shaking his head. So let's get right into it without wasting any time. Paul Roma strutted into the WWF locker room like he was God's gift to wrestling. Problem was, even God wanted a refund. The guy had the body of an action figure and the charisma of the plastic bubble it came in. Every time he cut a promo, Gorilla Monsoon looked like he was suffering a stroke in slow motion. Roma had a physique, sure. He looked like he could deadlift a horse, but couldn't carry a match to save his life. If flexing was a finish, he'd be champ. But once the bell rang, it was like watching a motivational speaker try MMA. Monsoon once said, "Roma's got abs, but no guts." He swaggered about like he was headlining WrestleMania, but the only thing he ever main evented was the warm-up match before the warm-up match. Gorilla Monsoon didn't hate Roma because he was bad. He hated him because Roma thought he was great. That kind of delusion is dangerous in the ring and even worse on the mic. Roma could cut a promo like a chainsaw with no gas, loud, pointless, and completely ineffective. Watching him talk was like watching someone give a TED talk on head trauma. This guy had the nerve to call himself a young stallion, which is ironic because every time he wrestled, the crowd stampeded to the bathrooms. Roma and Jim Powers were like the default characters on a wrestling video game before you unlocked the actual talent. And don't even get us started on Power and Glory, a tag team that sounded like an energy drink and wrestled like one had just spilled on a carpet. Hercules looked like he was dragging a bicep model around by the wrist. Their finisher was nice, but their matches felt like slow-motion blooper reels. Monsoon used to say, "These two have all the coordination of a food fight." But Roma thought he was royalty. He carried himself like he was Ric Flair, when really he was just Flair's dry cleaner's nephew. Monsoon called it straight. He looks like $1 million and wrestles like counterfeit change. Billy Jack Haynes walked into the WWF like he was built by Zeus and managed by cocaine. The man looked like he was carved out of granite, but as Gorilla Monsoon once muttered off mic, all that muscle and still not enough to carry a match. Gorilla hated wrestlers who made the business harder for everyone, and Haynes was a one-man demolition crew for backstage sanity. Always full of conspiracy theories, paranoia, and legal threats, Billy Jack wasn't just toxic. He was a biohazard in tights. Monsoon saw him as a guy who could have made it, but chose instead to be a loud, unstable pain in the ass. He no-showed events. He argued with bookers. He thought every push that didn't go his way was some deep state McMahon plot. Gorilla came from the era where you showed up, shut up, and did business. Billy Jack came from the school of, I should be champion because I grunted the loudest in catering. In the ring, he was all power and no polish. A suplex machine with no personality, except rage. His promos were like listening to a fever dream shouted through a bullhorn. Gorilla hated that kind of incoherent chest thumping. If Billy Jack had just wrestled and shut up, maybe Monsoon would have had his back. Instead, he treated every match like it was an audition for a lawsuit. Haynes constantly walked the line between shoot and stupid. From his feud with Hercules, where he practically potatoed the guy into a concussion, to his backstage rants, he was the kind of guy Monsoon would have rather seen in traffic than on the card. So here's to Billy Jack Haynes, the man who had the look of a main eventer and the mindset of a guy screaming outside a courthouse. Gorilla Monsoon didn't just hate watching him, he hated dealing with him. And when Gorilla hates dealing with you, you've already tapped out, brother. David Sammartino walked into the WWF carrying the greatest last name in company history, and immediately treated it like it was luggage he planned to lose. Bruno was a living god, a legit icon. David? He was the guy who got winded putting on his knee pads. Gorilla Monsoon didn't just dislike him, he saw him as a disgrace in boots. Monsoon loved Bruno. Bruno was tough, disciplined, respected. David was none of those things. He was the wrestling equivalent of someone showing up to Harvard because their dad donated a gym. The guy was riding Bruno's coattails so hard it's a miracle they didn't file a restraining order. In the ring, David was stiff, clumsy, and about as exciting as a tax seminar. His matches dragged harder than a drunk uncle at a wedding, and every time Gorilla had to call one of them, you could hear the soul leaving his body. "This youngster's got a long way to go," Monsoon once said, and by long way, he meant should leave the industry entirely. Backstage, David was even worse. Entitled, arrogant, always barking about not getting pushed. The only thing he pushed was Gorilla's patience. Monsoon hated guys who thought the business owed them something. And David? He thought being Bruno's son meant the main event was waiting backstage with a fruit basket. When he wasn't crying about creative, he was making excuses. "I'm not my father," he'd say. "Yeah, David, we noticed." Bruno filled Madison Square Garden. You couldn't fill a punch card at Arby's. At WrestleMania, he needed his dad in his corner just to get a pop. It was like watching Bruce Lee's kid show up to a fight with nunchucks made of paper towels. So here's to David Sammartino, the most disappointing sequel since Caddyshack 2. Monsoon didn't hate David because of who his father was. He hated him because David thought that was enough. Tony Atlas had a body that looked like it was sculpted by Michelangelo on steroids. The man was a walking anatomy chart, if every muscle also came with a dumb opinion. Gorilla Monsoon wasn't impressed, because in Monsoon's world, muscles didn't matter if the brain they surrounded was still on airplane mode. Tony called himself Mr. USA, but Gorilla just called him Mr. Delusional. Atlas had charisma, but only in the way that a malfunctioning fire alarm has charisma. Loud, distracting, and impossible to ignore. His promos sounded like motivational speeches delivered during a concussion test. If words were weights, Tony couldn't lift a damn sentence. Gorilla hated egos that wrote checks the ring work couldn't cash, and Tony's ego had overdrafted for years. He was unreliable, self-absorbed, and constantly blaming everyone but himself for why his push deflated faster than his cardio after 3 minutes in the ring. He wasn't just difficult, he was a walking HR complaint. Let's not forget the whole Saba Simba debacle. Vince threw him a cultural time bomb wrapped in tribal cosplay, and instead of refusing like a sane person, Atlas danced straight into it. Gorilla Monsoon refused to call that gimmick anything but an embarrassment, and when Monsoon thought you were embarrassing the business, you were dead to him. Period. Backstage, Atlas had more burned bridges than Sherman's March. Always arguing, always late, always broke, and always telling stories no one asked for. Monsoon liked prose. Tony Atlas was a walking episode of Behind the Music, but without the music. And yeah, he was strong. Great. So's a refrigerator, but at least that doesn't run its mouth about how it deserves a title run. Atlas was so self-obsessed, he probably flexed in the mirror before calling in sick. So here's to Tony Atlas, a man whose talent was buried under a mountain of muscle and missed opportunities. Gorilla Monsoon didn't just dislike him, he resented the wasted potential, the backstage drama, and the fact that Tony thought a six-pack was a substitute for a personality. Ken Patera wasn't just strong, he was throw a boulder at a bear strong. But Gorilla Monsoon didn't care how many weights you could lift when the heaviest thing you carried was your own bullshit. Patera went from Olympian to WWF embarrassment faster than you can say McDonald's incident. Yeah, let's start there. This guy literally threw a rock through a McDonald's window because they were closed. Who does that? Gorilla Monsoon came from a generation that built this industry with grit, honor, and a handshake. Patera showed up like an angry toddler who got denied a happy meal. He didn't just embarrass himself, he embarrassed the business. And for Monsoon, that was unforgivable. In the ring, Patera was strong, sure, but stiff? He made RoboCop look fluid. Gorilla hated calling his matches because they moved like molasses and landed like cement blocks. Patera sold punches like he was allergic to selling. Monsoon called it like he saw it. This guy couldn't sell water in a desert. Backstage, a total nightmare. Always acting like his Olympic resume made him untouchable. Gorilla didn't buy that crap. He respected people who worked. Patera wanted respect handed to him like a gold medal. Too bad all he earned was a jumpsuit and a mugshot. So here's to Ken Patera, the only guy who could powerlift a car but couldn't carry a storyline. Monsoon didn't just hate watching him wrestle. He hated explaining to the boys why the company kept giving this jackass second chances. Gorilla Monsoon didn't suffer fools. He suplexed them into the void. These five weren't just wrestlers he disliked, they were walking headaches and boots. From egos bigger than their talent to backstage disasters, they stood for everything Gorilla loathed. Wasted potential, no professionalism, and more drama than Monday Night Raw. Respect had to be earned in his era, and these guys left the receipt blank. When Gorilla rolled his eyes, it wasn't commentary, it was a eulogy. Enjoy the roast? smash that like button like it owes you a payday and subscribe for more savage deep dives. It's free, unlike Tony Atlas's excuses. Thanks for watching.